Hello, everybody, and welcome to All Blaze No Glory, the podcast. Happy New Year. If it's still okay to say Happy New Year, I'm never sure when you stop saying Happy New Year to people you're seeing for the first time or speaking to for the first time in the year. Oh my goodness, Blaze has got a squeak toy that he got for Christmas, and he's now playing with it since I started the podcast. So I do apologise. I normally bring him through when I do the podcast so he can sit and listen to the podcast that's essentially named after him. New year. Hope everyone is had a good festive period. You'll be pleased to note that I took Blaze's squeaker off, although there is another one hidden in his bed. So if he finds that, I do apologise. He actually came over for a wee clap after I hid his ball. But his new burger that we brought him back from Canada is sitting in his bed next to him. Speaking of Canada, I'll be, I say we'll, I'm not the royal we, what I'll be talking about today is be sort of reviewing some aspects of my honeymoon away to Canada and the sporting context, what sports we watched over there, what events we attended, and talking a little bit about that and how the Canadians do their sport. We'll also be talking just a little bit of some reactions to the Scottish men's squad announcement in rugby. I'll talk a little bit about the RFU's decision to change the laws on tackling to waist and below, and just anything else that maybe comes up in my mind, anything else that tickles my fancy. There's a little bit of NFL chat as well to be had. So, first things first, and I want to get this out of the way because it's one major negative thing that I think should be addressed. I don't really want to talk about it, but I want to talk about Rufus McLean, and I hope after today it'll be the last time his name is mentioned on the podcast. But we all maybe have read, certainly most of my listeners will have read the rather disturbing Daily Record article in relation to Rufus McLean and his conviction in terms of the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act, in terms of which the legislation requires someone to essentially have exerted coercive control, engaged in a course of conduct designed to essentially belittle, punish, coerce, or otherwise emotionally harm a victim. And so it's pretty grim legislation wording, and he has certainly, in what is described, acted in one of the worst manners possible, where it seems like he doesn't really have a lot of remorse. It's not like and I'm not downplaying any domestic abuse, but it's not been a snap thing. This has been a sustained course of conduct, which is just horrible. In the course of that, Glasgow Warriors now have announced that he's suspended, and they have launched an investigation. I understand there was a disciplinary hearing recently. I'm not sure of the outcome of that yet, but quite rightly, there are people on Twitter, Scottish rugby fans and Glasgow Warriors fans, questioning about how the club didn't know about this and about how this was all handled, because Rufus McLean played in quite late December. There was an article posted where he was the feature media person, for want of a better expression, on Glasgow Warriors webpage. Now, they've not taken those things down. I was listening to the Scottish Rugby blog and their views on this, and I 100% agree. That's an easy thing to do, and he should have been maybe taken down. And maybe, maybe you don't take the link to his bio down right away, but at the very least take down the sort of videos where he's talking about how great it was to win and all this sort of stuff. That being said, what a lot of people have said is that the SRU and Glasgow Warriors must have known about this. I think a lot of people maybe would find it difficult to believe that they didn't hear some form of rumblings about this. I think, from what I've seen on Twitter, there's a suggestion that the family tried to let them know about him as well. I guess they might have had certain issues with not dealing with anything official. But in terms of the legal process, there seems to be a slight misunderstanding about how they might not have known about this. If there's two ways this could have started essentially for it, or two prongs of the criminal procedure this could have started with. It could have started on solemn procedure, which is um, is how they start. Every case starts that ends up either in the High Court or in the Sheriff and Jury Court, and that's obviously higher level offences. Or it could have started in the summary court, which is a sheriff on his own, or a justice of the peace court. Now he's in the sheriff court, so we can ignore justice of the peace. If it started on the solemn procedure, he would have appeared in answer to what's called a petition. And at a petition, the first calling of any petition hearing, whether it's from custody or a petition undertaken or whatever it may be, it's heard entirely in private, unlike other hearings where there may be members of the press in the court who could report that he appeared for something. It comes out entirely privately, and then he would make no plea. So with the timing of this offence, and I know nothing about this case, he may have appeared sometime in 2021 and made no plea, which is simply given to you by the police, which is the procedure you have to adopt in that case, in the case of a petition, sorry. In terms of if it's a case that started in the summary procedure, there's three ways that those can start, and there is somewhat of a backlog from in the courts. It can start on a case that's cited, where essentially you get a letter and you're never ever arrested. You just get a letter saying you need to answer this charge on this date and at this time. You can be arrested and appear the next day from custody, or you can be charged by the police and essentially given an undertaking, which is a form of bail order. The difficulty in knowing how about the timings in this case is the reporting on it is somewhat strange. Ordinarily, when a Scottish capped rugby player appears at court for something as serious as this and pleads guilty, it would be reported on that date or on that day, or if not the next morning. It normally may even go online on that date and then in the papers the next morning. But what seems to have weirdly happened here is that the paper article on the 18th of January seems to be the first reporting of this case. So it would tend to suggest, without knowing anything about the actual procedure and when he pled and all the rest of it, that he either pled by letter in a cited case, or he was appearing on a reduction to summary of some sort, and he pled at a pleading diet, which maybe had no court reporter in at some point. It could have even been between Christmas and New Year. Or he's pled in absence, and the story hasn't been released because he wasn't there and they were waiting for him to come in to confirm his plea. So if a lawyer, if in a cited case you can appear yourself or be represented, or you can actually plead by letter. So if he had appeared himself, if he wasn't there and he was pleading to such a thing, sometimes the sheriff will continue the case for him to be personally present to essentially confirm his plea, and for the narration and things like that. If it was a case that started its life as a petition, it can be reduced to a summary complaint. And again, given the timing of it, he may there may have been a suggestion that he was to plead in absence in that case, although that's quite rare, and normally you would appear on that. Nevertheless, whatever's happened when he's initially pled, it's not been reported on. So it's hard to say whether the SRU knew or not, but one thing I do agree with, and I fully agree with this, I was listening to the Scottish Rugby podcast as well, and Cammy Black mentioned this, is the SRU at the very least now need to look into how they deal with such matters, and how they allowed someone who was exercising such behaviour, and make sure that they can keep some kind of an eye on these things, and make sure that these sorts of issues are dealt with in a manner that is preventative rather than reactive. And maybe in the future, and it was a good point, Mike Hammy. They don't need to, at the point he is involved in a case and they're aware of that, they don't need to sack him or suspend him without pay if he's saying, "Look, I'm involved in this case, but I'm not guilty." In fact, I don't think it would be proper for them to do that, or legally correct. But they could have put him on gardening leave and kept him out of the media altogether, and maybe just said he's not playing at the moment for personal reasons, which is exactly what Cammy said. I'm quoting him. I think that's the best way they could have dealt with it. Anyway, I spent enough time on him because he's a waste of time, but I just wanted to kind of I thought it might be helpful for people when they're having their thoughts on it to maybe understand just how the cases can start. I'm pretty sure that's a fairly weak explanation for it all, but if you've got any questions, you can send me a DM or whatever and ask me, and I can try and clarify any other points in terms of the procedure. I can't tell you anything about the procedure in this case because I don't know, but I just think it's helpful to know the actual procedure and how the case might have started his life, to maybe understand how certain things fell in place. I do think it would be good for the SRU and the Glasgow Warriors to maybe go through a procedure of maybe explaining to the fans how the timeline worked here and what steps they're going to take to ensure that a player isn't playing after all these things that he's done in the future, and not essentially being celebrated after doing something so heinous. Right, let's move on from that because that's pretty negative, and let's talk about some more positive stuff. Let's talk about Damar Hamlin and the Buffalo Bills. Now, you might be thinking, if you know the story about Damar Hamlin, how in the name of the wee man is that positive? Well, I think that it's a positive story in this sense. For those of you who don't know, Damar Hamlin was playing on Monday Night Football in early January. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head. And he dropped to the turf, and CPR had to be administered. There was ongoing CPR for 9 minutes. He had stopped breathing at one point, and the players, if you were watching the broadcast, looked absolutely out of it in terms of they were so concerned. And there was what the positive about it was Damar has started a children's charity. He actually stayed at college in his hometown, and he had offers of maybe going to bigger schools and stuff, but he stayed there to look after his wee brother, make sure his wee brother was well looked after. He set up a kids charity to try and help kids have a better future and to get toys and things like that. And what was positive about it is the way everyone came together in that moment, and sport didn't matter anymore. I was actually watching it live. It's one of the first times I'd watched Monday Night Football live for a long time, largely because I was in Canada at the time and the time zones worked. But I think it is a kind of uplifting story, Damar Hamlin's story where he dropped on the field, and his toy drive, which is supposed to raise $2,500, ended up raising over $4 million. Is just incredible, and I think it's something that gives me a little hope when you can turn a positive into a negative, and hopefully we can see more of that and that outpouring of unity, because at the end of the day, sometimes we're fans and we're passionate and we want our team to win, but the vitriol in certain quarters needs to stop, and that was one thing I loved about the Damar Hamlin thing. Every team in the NFL supported him. Teams changed their colours for Twitter and things like that in a show of solidarity. His jersey was the highest selling jersey in NFL.com, and Fanatics, who are the the providers of these jerseys, donated all the proceeds to his charity as well. So it's just incredible stuff, and go and read some of the articles on it. It's pretty inspiring, and I mean, watching it live was one of the most terrifying, harrowing experiences I've ever had in my life. Watching what appeared to be someone essentially fighting for their life on field, watching the commentators react in a manner that they just couldn't really cope or know what to say was harrowing. I'm sure Damar Hamlin will never ever get wind of this podcast, but I was so glad to hear when he woke up. I was following it, constantly following it. Even Lindsay was following it, who's not really into the NFL like I am. Having watched a wee bit of it with me in the hotel, she was following it. She read up on him. She found out about his college and stuff. So it was an uplifting story when we heard that he was FaceTiming his team and telling them to go and win and all this stuff, and how positively he took it, saying, and you can believe in God or not believe in God, but saying that God had different plans for him when the Bills were playing their last regular season game, but he wished he was with his brothers and all this sort of stuff. It was just, it showed how positive sport can be and the community of sport. And it to me, whilst it was really concerning what happened to him, and I hope to never see anything like it again, I think it certainly turned a negative into a positive with the reaction, the unity, and the just the outpouring of love. If you don't know more about, if you want to know more about that, just look up the name Damar Hamlin, and you'll find out more about it. And I think you can still donate to his charity and things. That was something I wanted to touch on before sort of went into a wee bit more of the meat and drink of things. So with that in mind, given that I witnessed that when I was in Canada watching the TV, let's talk a little bit about Canada. I don't want to go on and on about my honeymoon and what we ate and all this sort of stuff, because frankly, that's not what you want to hear maybe. But I do want to talk about Canada and how they approached, essentially the only sport I went to see was live was hockey, but how they approached that, and how they present it on television as well. So Lindsay and I went to Canada for 3 weeks for our honeymoon, into Alberta, which is more west of Canada. Landed in Calgary, and the first place we drove to was Red Deer. Now, the funny thing about Red Deer was Lindsay and I loved our experience in Red Deer, but if any Canadian that we told we went to Red Deer during our honeymoon to gave us a look like we were absolutely mad, which is actually funny because it leads on to the fact that we ended up in the paper in Red Deer, and then we ended up being name dropped on Spittin' Chicklets, which we knew nothing about. And we got called crazy essentially on that. So Red Deer is about 2 hours maybe north of Calgary, in between Calgary and Edmonton. And when I saw that was on the way to Edmonton, I remembered listening to Spittin' Chicklets, and I thought, I want to watch a game there because it's meant to be brilliant for what they call junior hockey, which is under 20s hockey in Canada. But the junior hockey in Canada is essentially, that's the stepping stone to the pro level. It's as I suppose under 20 is at rugby or whatever, and so the players there are really high quality, and that was the WHL, which is Canada's level of what they call major junior. Underneath that, you've got junior A, B, C. So we got tickets to the game well before we went. The ticketing site was a bit of a disaster, but it was worth it in the end. And we got to the game. Now, one thing I will tell you about buying tickets for any game in Canada is do not pick tickets right directly behind either team's bench because you will not be able to see. Um, Having been a British hockey fan, I thought sitting behind the bench, you'd have a seat sort of, so your eyes were above kind of the heads of the players and the coaches standing on the bench. Uh, However, I was very wrong, and we basically spent the first period. We could smell everything that was happening, but we could not see anything very much that was happening. So we did move in the second period. So, little word of warning: if you're going to Red Deer or any Canadian rink, don't sit right behind the benches. You're better off behind the goal, or but sit further back, and you'll see a lot more. Because I certainly learned that. That game was the difference with that under-20s game to anything I've seen in Britain is the only time I've seen a sport that's sort of age bracketed, that's presented like it's a massive deal. Like, I've been to Scotland under-20s and there's burger vans there and stuff like that, but the sort of just the entertainment and stuff, and it's the way the sport works. Hockey, there's stops in hockey, and the clock stops and the players change and things like that. So there's chance for competitions, there's chance for doing a lot more in those breaks. And that's one of the things that, you can't do that in football and rugby. But just even at half time, the way they were, not in half time, in between periods, the way they were, they had Chukka Park in certain arenas we were in. They had 50-50 draw, which was, I think, in Red Deer, and this is a junior game, remember, I think the jackpot was $21,000. And, tickets weren't that expensive for it. So, this being the first game I had been to in Canada in over 12 years, I was super excited for it. I didn't know how Lindsay would take it. And when we got there and we're right behind the bench and couldn't see anything, I got a little bit of a dirty look. Although once we moved, Lindsay just seemed to get into it a little bit, and she told me that she quite enjoyed the hockey. And I would encourage anyone that's in Alberta, and I'm not saying anything about Red Deer the town because we didn't see a lot of it, but go to Red Deer for a game if you're near. If you're in Edmonton or in Calgary, you can get there quite easily. Go there and watch a junior hockey game because it is an experience. The fans are super passionate. The music they play for all the different parts of the game is super exciting. And the two teams, it was 7-1 the final score, which was a bit one-sided, but the two teams went at it the whole 60 minutes because they're all there trying to prove themselves so they can make it to the next level of the NHL. And it's actually, to be honest, probably the most entertaining hockey you can see. I think the NHL is the excitement, is the best league in the world. But junior hockey is pretty exciting too because they give everything. So following that game, this is where I tweeted to the Red Deer Rebels, who were the team we were watching, that there was honeymooners from Scotland there. And in response to that, I was contacted by a journalist to do an interview in the local Red Deer paper, the Red Deer Advocate, which was really a cool experience getting interviewed for a paper and then seeing our faces essentially in a newspaper on the other side of the world. And we got some pretty cool feedback from that. People said it was a really cool story. And then there was obviously that followed on from that, we ended up on Spittin' Chicklets, which is one of the biggest ice hockey podcasts in North America. So it was pretty cool just to get name dropped on that as well. So after that, there was a few other games. We went to a game of league lower, the AJHL, which is the Alberta Junior Hockey League, and that is Junior A, which is below Major Junior. So it's the kids there they're trying to get either into the WHL with a view to maybe one day try and make the NHL, or they're looking to maybe get into the NCAA, which is the North the the American College Association, like sports association. So it's again, the level's high. It's much higher than just about anything you'll see in Britain. I mean, the Elite League has reasonably high standards that I think an Elite League team would possibly beat those junior teams, but I think it'd be pretty close, and that's because the Elite League's got a bunch of senior guys and stuff in it. So the good thing about that game was it was cheap to get into, but it was so like sort of like a family kind of community club almost. Even though it was these guys playing in it, it was fierce from the start. It was high paced, passionate hockey. And Spruce Grove, it was Spruce Grove Saints that we saw in the AGHL. That was where I got the first jersey I bought on honeymoon, which is a double sided one, which is quite a cool idea. I wish they'd do it with rugby shirts where it's reversible, so you can reverse into the dark or the white, which was really cool to do. I incidentally, we won the 50-50 that night as well, but it was a much lower charge of $1,500. But you could tell the woman was quite pleased for us after we bought all the merch that we kind of won our money back and and stuff. So yeah, the AJHL, there's other leagues that you have to kind of Google them because for major juniors there's OHL, QMJHL, which is Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and then there's the the WHL, which is the one we were at with the Red Deer. The AJHL is one of the leagues that sort of feeds into the WHL, and then there's the BCHL as well, which is the British Columbia Hockey League, which is again Junior A. I don't know the ones in Ontario and stuff, so you kind of have to Google things. If you are going to Canada and you want to look into something like that, then I would recommend, if you're over during hockey season, that you look into those games because they're really quite well priced to go and watch. The standard hockey is fantastic, and it's kind of like anything. Like you could be watching second 15 rugby, but if the two teams are reasonably well matched and ambitious, then you're going to have an exciting time, and that's exactly what that game was. I mean, it was far from amateur. You know, the level of ability these players have is ridiculous, and most of them would, as I mentioned, most of them would definitely get jobs over here in the professional leagues quite easily. The level of hockey they were playing. The next night we went to the Edmonton Oilers, which is an NHL team, and I saw Connor McDavid, who was a number one draft pick some years ago, and that was an experience in itself because the Oilers lost. The game itself was kind of like one of these Premiership football games where the two teams kind of cancel each other out, and there's not a lot happening. In this particular game, I suppose the Oilers were sort of more dominant on the puck and they had a lot more shots. But I saw two greats that night. I saw Connor McDavid, who I think he's like one of the youngest players to reach. I can't remember how many points it is, but he's on track to be a first ballot Hall of Famer in the NHL. I saw him and Connor Hellebuck, who was in goals for the Winnipeg Jets, who was unreal in his abilities. The atmosphere at the game was really good, and it was the game when I realised that Lindsay actually, she might not admit it totally, but Lindsay had a bit of was a bit into hockey because she was sort of getting a little bit like, will they do this, will they do that, in supporting the Oilers to try and come back and make it 2-2 at the end. So what I would say about the NHL is if you're going to Canada, then the NHL is only in so many cities. So there's Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Montreal, and last and definitely last, Toronto. So particularly, the Edmonton game wasn't actually too bad. There was a few empty seats, and I don't know whether that was season ticket holders that maybe had other family plans because it was New Year's Eve, and it was like 8 o'clock at night on New Year's Eve, or whether they hadn't sold out. But they weren't too bad to get to. But I've heard that at certain times and with certain opponents, you'll really struggle to get tickets, and tickets can become super expensive. So if you want to go to the NHL and see the best hockey the world has to offer, essentially in terms of athletes and players, then realistically you need to plan miles ahead, know when the tickets are going on sale, sign up for any pre-sales that you can get and all that sort of stuff. Be really careful, because there are a lot of places that will claim they've got tickets for a game before they actually are out. So if I were you, I would stick to the official ones and go on like Ticketmaster, as much as I'm not a massive fan of Ticketmaster since they introduced surge pricing. Ticketmaster is the best way to go for that sort of thing. Yeah, and enjoy it. One of the great things about hockey is there's so much going on at once, but also in the way the Canadians do it, there's lots of, they've all got big screens and stuff like that, but they've got like live music. The announcers obviously announce things. There's always plenty of, and the bigger the arena, the more varied the snacks are. So that's something to be aware of. And it's just really good entertainment from start to finish in terms of, like I'm a geek with sports, with a lot of things. So actually, when we were in Red Deer and we couldn't see because we were behind the goals, behind the bench, I was quite enjoying watching the coaches and how they worked the bench, and that's something that you can learn from or watch. And that's what's fascinating about hockey. It's one of the only sports where you substitute whilst the game is going on. Most other sports, there has to be a stop and play. You never really see in rugby, Finn Russell's down, so he goes off for a couple of minutes. Let's whoever's on, we'll say Blair Kinghorn, come on for a couple of minutes till he's got his breath back, and then he runs back on again and they swap over. That's not the nature of rugby. Rugby's more endurance and more attritional, whereas ice hockey is explosive. And yes, you need endurance to do ice hockey. You need to be able to recover quickly. But that's one of the good things about ice hockey is you go on, you burn for 35 to 40 seconds if you're a forward and you're off. So it's definitely the fastest team sport on two legs. Except if you've got a horse that can do a handstand. After that, after Edmonton Oilers, we went to Edmonton Oil Kings on New Year's Day, where we got the sort of corporate table seats, where they bring you table service. It's a trap. It ended up costing us more at the same price as the tickets did in food and drink. And Lindsay was only drinking Pepsi. So be careful if you do that. But it is cheaper. If you want to do anything like these corporate kind of experiences, then do it at a junior game, because it will be like more reasonably priced. It was only $50 to sit in essentially the best seats in the Rogers Centre, which is the same place the Oilers play, and watch the junior game. It's brilliant. After Edmonton, we had a great time. We had a good time in Edmonton in terms of, it was mainly the hockey stuff that was what we did in Edmonton. Our next stop was Jasper, which is sort of, I want to say west and kind of across, but I really couldn't tell you from Edmonton. But it's in the Canadian Rockies, in the mountains. And getting there was a bit stressful. There was one point where we thought the van was breaking down. It was, well, not a van, they gave us a truck. And that's another thing you should know. If you hire a truck, then just ask them if it can be in four-wheel drive all the time, because we got this truck and we weren't sure it could be in four-wheel drive unless we were stuck. And on the roads, because the back end of it's so icy, that it can skid about even if you're not driving funny. And this thing started rattling as well. So they also give you a stick with brush on one end and a scraper on the other, and that's very important. You need to clear them underneath your wheels every night, every time you drive in Canada during the winter, because I found to my peril that it makes it sound like the van's about to blow up. And then the option of the place where we'd hired it when we said we had concerns was to drive back to Edmonton after being 2 hours away from Edmonton to return it. Now, luckily, when I started to drive back to Edmonton, I realised that it stopped rattling because I'd been out and hit all the snow and everything off it. So we got away with one in a sense, and we went to Jasper. Now, we were only in Jasper a couple of nights. If you go Jasper in the winter, Pyramid Lake is definitely worth going to because it's kind of funny. You see all these things in postcards and the pictures, the tourism pictures and stuff, and you're like, I don't know if that's actually what it looks like. And when you get there, it doesn't look quite like it. But Pyramid Lake in Jasper definitely looks like it. You can see why they've used it for the postcards, and you can skate at the bottom of it on Pyramid Lake. Which is what I did, and someone cleared a sort of ring plus a sort of small ice hockey rink on it. So I just skated around the ring. I didn't have any stick or anything with me, and essentially, it was just lovely to just burn off some energy skating around, and yeah, it's bumpy, but you've got if you should probably go skating before you go if you're going in the winter, and then from there we actually went to Jasper Ice Arena or Jasper Leisure Centre, which has an ice rink in it, and that let sort of Lindsay get a bit of a skate because the ice was flatter and there was boards and stuff, and she hadn't skated in 10 years, so it was useful. And I found out there was going to be an amateur game, so I went to that at night when Lindsay was sort of in her bed, and watched these two amateur teams playing. Now, they weren't anything special, but it was kind of cool to see how they'd done their hockey in the amateur game. No check-in, so it was a bit safer. Just the two referees, and they played two 22-minute periods instead of the usual 3 20-minute periods. After that, we went to Banff. You'd be pleased to know that's the end of me rabbiting all about sport in Banff. Banff is awesome. We went to the gondola, which if you're ever in the Rockies, go to the gondola at Banff. It is so worth it for the price you pay for it. Takes you up to the top of Sulphur Mountain. There's then a walkway where you walk along, you get all these beautiful views, and eventually you essentially summit Sulphur Mountain, although you've not really summited it because you've not walked all the way up it. And you get some cracking photos, some beautiful views. It is cold up there in the winter. You can go in the summer up there as well. There's also at the bottom of it, there's a hot springs in Banff. The difficulty with the hot springs is basically just getting in them because they're really popular. So you have to kind of book them well in advance. So when you book your ticket to go to Canada, and then that was that. After that, we went down to Calgary. We'd spent a few days in Banff. Went to Calgary Dinos University game, ice hockey, women's hockey. It was good to see there was a good crowd at the women's game. It was fairly quiet for a Saturday night, but it was a Saturday night, so you can kind of understand it. Dinos ended up winning 3-0. I kind of embarrassed myself because I wanted a hat when I got there and they didn't have a shop. So I was a little bit disappointed because it was just a uni campus rink. But it was quite cool to see a uni rink where, it's actually for the university. And then the last game we went to was the Wranglers, which is the AHL. That's a league below the NHL. Now, the way the Americans do their sport and the NHL does their sport is they have farm teams. So the Calgary Wranglers are the farm team of the Calgary Flames. So a lot of the players in the Calgary Wranglers are actually got what they call a two-way contract with the Calgary Flames, where they can be called up if a player, say, gets injured for the Flames, or a player's playing rubbish for the Flames, so they send them down, or they trade a player for a draft pick and they want to pick up they want to bring somebody up to cover that hole. They can call people up from the AHL. There's different rules about waivers and stuff of sending people down, but it's basically all these players are on the books for the team in the NHL as well as the team they're playing for. And again, it's pretty cool because you're seeing players that might be future NHLers, or you're seeing players that maybe have played a bit in the NHL but also played in the AHL. And you get that sort of, it's decent hockey but a little bit more reasonably priced. So again, that's something to look out for if you're going to Canada or America or anything like that where you want to go to a hockey game. Have a look for where the farm teams are. They might be near to they're not always near to the place that they're the farm team of. The Edmonton farm team, for example, that was playing the Calgary farm team that night, they were from Bakersfield in California. So it's not always clear cut where they'll be from, but it's certainly worth looking into. So that was essentially the sporting part of Canada, and I think the live sporting part of Canada, as well as some anecdotes about the trip itself. I think what I found really good about it was just the intermingling of fans, but there still being a massive atmosphere. There was somebody, and I can't remember who he is, so I actually maybe one day try and get him on the podcast. There was a Harlequins guy who was talking about how there should be designated away ends and designated home ends in rugby. I don't like that idea because rugby's unique in the sense that you go to a Scotland-England game and you shout for your team, but you're sitting next to English fans, or you go to a Scotland-Wales game and you're all intermingled. And one thing I hate about going to certain football away games is sometimes if you're a away fan, you get stuck in like the wee rubbishy corner, and even though you can make noise or whatever, it's like, you're still in a rubbish place to watch the game. You're all cramped up. There's only one set of toilets and one place to get a pipe for about actually Scottish football, so 10 people. But I don't really like the idea of designated zones for fans. I don't think it will create more of an atmosphere if you have away fans in a certain area. And I know what will happen. Away fans will get put in a rubbish area to sit in a lot of places, so those away fans might not go, or they'll buy home tickets. And if people get super behind this sort of tribal idea that they kind of have more at football, where you have your home and away ends, then I'm not saying there's going to be trouble, but there will certainly be maybe less of an atmosphere. So I worry about that. But yeah, I love the fact that it's super passionate, but it is kind of tribal. But in the same token, the fans actually just all sit next to each other as well, and just got on with being kind of tribal and supporting their team. You can sit anywhere in the arena. The game is fast and furious, and I could talk all day about how much hockey means to me and how long I've been in it. But that is kind of exciting to me. So let's turn away from Canada for a little bit. Might come back onto it at the end and talk about the Scotland men's squad. I'm going to say that this is one of the times where I would think that I'm least disappointed in Gregor Townsend for the squad he's picked. But there are some talking points, and as always, we'll start with the biggest one, which for once is not the omission of Finn Russell, or any soundbite that Gregor Townsend's created because he has omitted Finn Russell, but rather the calling up of Rory McConaughey, the player who has formerly played for England. I didn't see it coming, I have to say, before the squad. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind. There's times where you find that a player's Scottish qualified, you think, are they going to be called up? I have to say, a 31-year-old winger from Bath Rugby and former England player was not someone I was expecting to be called up. Now, I'm going to also qualify that with saying I have no issue with a former England player being called up under the rules. I know people are uneasy about players who played for other countries before. But Jack Dempsey's came in having had 19 caps for Australia, and been pretty good for us. So I don't see any issue with it. I just was surprised by it. I think he is in as a bit of a band-aid, or a bandage, sorry, for Darcy Graham being injured. I think it's let's bring him in, see what he's like around camp and stuff, because he's got pedigree. But if Darcy Graham was available, I think out of all the back threes, I think he would be the one that was left behind. The only other player that maybe that happens to is Sean Maitland. Out of the two, I don't see any of the other wingers being left out, because Kyle Staines, excellent for Glasgow and been really good for Scotland in the 5 caps he's had. Duhan van der Merwe's a sort of monster that we're not going to leave out. And I'm not saying Kinghorn just to wind people up and say that he's a back 3 player, but Kinghorn's also played most of his caps for Scotland on the wing. So you've got a pretty solid back 3, and actually Kinghorn's done quite a good job there. And then you got Maitland, who is a great servant, so that's why I think probably McConaughey would have been the most likely to not have been called up if Darcy Graham was fit. The other controversial call-up, and a lot of people are wondering how this happened, and wondering, I suppose, or feeling that Kinghorn's been done a disservice, is Ben Healy. Now, Scotland have been calling out for quality 10s. Essentially, the one thing that Scotland seems to have in abundance is quality back rows and quality centres. We have a decent amount of 9s, maybe not all full international quality 9s, but we have a good amount of 9s. But standoff is definitely a position where, beyond Finn Russell, Adam Hastings is good. Kinghorn's been okay in spells at 10, and then but you get to sort of beyond Adam Hastings and Finn Russell, and you kind of fall off a cliff a wee bit to some extent. I know that, as I say, Kinghorn's been good. I think Kinghorn's better for Edinburgh because Edinburgh's playing style suits Kinghorn. I've been calling for ages for Charlie Savala to get a shot, but if I'm being honest, Ben Healy is a 10 that's more suited to the international game, and I think having him as an actual backup to Finn Russell, maybe someone who can compete once Finn sort of steps down, because he's not ancient Finn, but he's 30. He will step down in a few years. Having someone like Ben Healy who's young and can compete with Adam Hastings, Blair Kinghorn if he's still on the go, and Charlie Savala, and Tom Jordan, because he'll be coming eligible soon and he's tearing up trees for Glasgow, and in fact might be a better 10 than anyone I mentioned there apart from Finn. I don't think this is a bad move by Scottish Rugby, and if he's up for it, then good. And actually, I do think in some respects, I appreciate that folk are like, well, he wanted to play for Glasgow, he turned Scotland down, not Glasgow, he wanted to play for Ireland, he turned Scotland down before, he's not going to be as passionate and all this sort of thing. Do you not think he's going to have the bit between his teeth because Ireland turned him down? Do you not think when he's out there standing face to face against Sexton that he's want to do one over on him because Sexton's the one who's held down every 10 in Ireland who could progress? I 100% think that Ben Healy is an upgrade as a backup 10 to what we've got. You could argue that Adam Hastings is better. I think Kinghorn is not a finished product in that position. I think Kinghorn's one of these. He's actually unfortunate in the sense he's a great rugby player, and I think, but he's a kind of rugby player you plug in and play where you need him to, and for me that actually his versatility is his undoing, because Kinghorn is kind of the jack of all trades, master of none, and I don't mean that he can't play those positions well. What I mean is that he is not exceptional in terms of international exceptional in any position really, but he's very, very good in a number of positions. And I think that having Healy, who's outright 10, who I think can cover fullback, if I remember right from watching the Munster game that went to penalty kicks, is a big upgrade on that as a backup to Finn, and I think he's also a good player who can come on and control the game. Very good goal kicker as well, which might be really crucial in a lot of games. So I'm actually really pleased that Ben Healy's been called up. I wanted him to be called up years ago. I know that a couple of years ago, and I know that he turned down Glasgow. But I think, when you're younger, Edinburgh, I keep saying Glasgow, I mean Ireland. When you're younger, your head's not entirely sure where you want to be, especially if you're living in Ireland and stuff. Your peers and your pals are there, but he's got Scottish parentage. He's got to be good to go, and it's the nature of professional rugby. That's what's going to happen. I don't know quite as much for Cameron Henderson, except I've heard great things, so I'm not going to comment on his call up. I also quite pleased for Stafford McDowell, but again, this goes back to my point about there being so many good centres in Scotland. We've got Hugh Jones in the squad. We've got Sione Tuipulotu in the squad. Stafford's obviously an inside centre, so I should mention those two. Cammy Redpath and Sam Johnson's missing. I think that could be game time related as an inside centre. We've also not called up James Lang, who has been really good for Edinburgh in the games he's played. I think he's actually been probably our best centre this year. We've got, but waiting in the wings, we've got Cammy Hutchison, we've got Rory Hutchinson, we've got Chris Dean, who could still do a job if needed for Scotland and might go down as one of the best Scottish centres to never be capped. Mark Bennett has not made the squad, and I appreciate his form's dipped, but he was unbelievable in the summer last year. It's really it's so bizarre that we've got so many players in one position and we can't work out how to make players in other positions to cover those. In terms of the props, the other thing it concerns me is the tight head prop. Loose head, we've got Sutherland, and we've got Pierre Schumann, and Batty, and I think those three are good. I think you've got 1, 2, 3 there. It's clear who 1, 2, and 3 are, or clear who the 1A and 1B, and then the three is. But it's fine. It's safe enough. You're in safe hands. And if push came to shove, you've got Alan Dell, who's got international experience, and then you've got other props beyond that. What does concern me is our tight head position. Now, I am still of the view that Nell does a job. So Nell being in the squad is not something I'm against, especially in the Six Nations where you're playing to win the Six Nations. Whether we think we can win the Six Nations realistically or not, you're playing to win them. Okay? Xander Ferguson's hurt, so he's not going to start against England. So I'm assuming that they'll start Nell, because beyond that, Murphy Walker's not there because he's hurt. We've got Javin Sebastian, who is okay. He's steady enough. And we've got Simon Bergen, who, after watching the game tonight, or watching the tail end of the Glasgow game against Bath, I think should have been stood aside for Darcy Ray. Because Scrummaging looked a bit all over the place, and I did clarify with those in the know about the positioning, and he said he was over. It was Craig Manson of Scottish Rugby Podcast said that his leg placement was bad. Now, I've always thought he was a bit of a dodgy scrummager. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt in that one, but I think that we should have had Darcy Ray in, But even at that tight head position really, really concerns me, because beyond Nell and Fagerson, I know Fagerson is there, but Fagerson's injured. I worry about our scrummaging, particularly against Ireland, where we're going to be up against some really solid scrummagers, and we're going to need to keep our scrum together. Even Wales, who have had a bad time of it recently, are going to be tough. And Italy, in the last Six Nations, gave our scrum a bit of a doing on the tight head side, even when Xander was playing. So we're up against it in the Six Nations, and tight head is one of the areas that really concerns me. Hooker, we've got quite a few good hookers, and I'm glad that they've brought Fraser Brown back. I never thought I'd say that, because he used to get penalised too much. But it'll be interesting to see. We've got Turner in there as well, I think, for the squad. 4 hookers in the squad. It'll be interesting to see what the dynamic is. Dave Cherry seems to have found favour a little bit at times, but then Brown came back for that All Blacks game and was outstanding. Turner's been really good and is a powerful runner, and I really like Ashman. So I think we've got a good array of hookers at the back row. We could talk all day about which back row missed and who should have been in there, Connor Boyle, etc., etc. I think, to be honest with you, I think that's silly to argue about it. It's just we've got too many really good back rows. I even brought up like Dylan Richardson, for example, the South playing, I think, for the Bulls. Is it? He's injured at the moment, but he was unbelievable at the start of the season. So there's a lot of back rows that we can pick from, and I think whoever Townsend picks in the back row, and it's not like we could jump up and down to defend him. Somebody somewhere was going to moan that he was wrong. That's the Scotland squad, and what I kind of think is interesting about it. I wanted to quickly go through who I've got, or who I might pick for my 23, just as a kind of discursive exercise in my head. So this is maybe going to be kind of interesting. I think against England, I think I would still start Scuban, just ahead of Rory Sutherland. I think hooker, for me, that's the tough position to pick. I think against England in Twickenham, as much as people will maybe think I'm not right in the head, I think I would possibly opt for Fraser Brown with Dave Cherry off the bench, because those two are the most experienced, to me, the most settled in their arrows, but also Fraser Brown's that big abrasive player, and then you could maybe bring Cherry off the bench. Might be an option to start Cherry and have an all Edinburgh front row with WP Nell, who I would start against England. I think, given that we're scrummaging, I think I'd start WP, get him 50 minutes in against their best front row, and then hope that we can hang on if there's any substitutes to be made. He could maybe go through 80, but I don't think he'll be playing against Wales if he does. And that's only assuming that Fagerson's, of course, not available for selection. Second row's a bit more up for debate, I think. I would start my namesake Richie Gray. I think he's been playing too well not to get involved. I'm not a big fan of starting Grant Gilchrist, so possibly I'd start Richie Gray and Sam Skinner, and then have maybe Johnny off the bench, or start Johnny and Richie together with Sam Skinner off the bench, so you've got that impact off the bench. Cummins is not available, or he would have probably been in over the others for being the partner of Richie Gray. But Richie Gray's just playing too well, and with the World Cup coming up, I don't care about his age. I just want to see how we can maybe possibly get out of that group, and he's one of the best players we've got at the moment. Back row, kind of picks itself in a sense. Well, certainly 6 picks itself. I would pick Jamie Ritchie, unless you're going to put Mark Fagerson there with Jamie Ritchie at 7, and then have Dempsey at 8. But personally, I'd pick Ritchie at 6. I'd pick Crosby at 7 and Fagerson at 8. Matt Fagerson has to be in the starting 15 for me. He's always good for Scotland as far as I'm concerned, or nearly always good for Scotland. In the backs, you're going to have Finn Russell starting presumably. That to me means that you have to pick Ali Price, which failing Ben White, I don't think Finn and George Turner work as well together, because I think they both want to call the game. Is the impression I get. But personally, I think we just have to opt for Ali Price because he is the most experienced, and I think he's due a game where one of those games where he just controls everything like he did the last time in Twickenham, and Finn Russell is his partner. 12 for me is probably one of the toughest positions for Townsend to pick, because whoever he picks there, someone's going to think he should have picked someone else or he should have done something different. He could go for what Glasgow had against Bath, which was Hugh Jones at 12 and Tuipulotu at 13. I don't think he'll do that, and I don't think he should do that. I think he should pick Tuipulotu at 12 and Harris at 13. If he wants to be adventurous and wants to play Tuipulotu at 13, which I think he's probably slightly better at, I'd put Cammy Redpath at 12 with Tuipulotu at 13. And I think that gives us a little bit more balance in the back in there. And arguably, and this might come as kind of crazy, you've then got the option in the back three of putting Harris in as a winger, because you've not got Darcy Graham, and he can play on the wing, or you put him in the bench. In terms of the back three, so to finalise, I'm going to opt for being a little bit more creative and going down the route of Tuipulotu at 13 with Cammy Redpath at 12, which is a little less experienced, but I think would give us a little bit more in attack. In terms of the back three, I don't know if we're ruling Hoggy out. I think Hoggy is not played, as far as I understand. He's not going to have played for quite a while before this, or before the Six Nations. So there's a chance that Hoggy doesn't start. But if he is fit, I think he'll have to be the fullback on the day. Although, personally, if he is just coming back from injury, I'd rather that he was maybe on the bench as an SOS option, and you maybe looked at putting Maitland at 15 or Ollie Smith at 15. I think now I've got to make a decision. I've put myself in a bit of a corner here. 11 is Duhan van der Merwe, and I think we keep it that way, even though arguably he's not had the best form recently. I think you do it that way just because he's going to draw defenders, he's going to make meters, and the like. I think in my head, I'm in a lot of different minds as to who should do what. I'm going to assume that Hoggy is fit enough to play, in which case I'm going to put him at 15, which just leaves the 14 shirt. And I think, as much as I love Sean Maitland, that Kyle Steyn should get the nod for the reasons that he is playing well for Glasgow. He defends really well, and he can also cover other positions if we're completely screwed as well. So that's helpful to know. In terms of the bench, I think I've ultimately decided on Cherry starting. So Brown on the bench. Sutherland is our loose head on the bench. Tight head on the bench with the Sander not playing. going to opt for Gavin Sebastian and hope that things go well. I've already said that I've opted for Richie Gray and Sam Skinner in the second row. So we have Johnny Gray on the bench. In the back row, I opted for Jamie Ritchie, Luke Crosby and Matt Fagerson. I think a lot of people will be screaming at me for this because it leaves out Jack Dempsey, but I think Andy Christie should be our bench option, given he can cover all three positions. I don't see Velicott in this squad, so my biases are put to one side. I think as much as George Turner's been playing well, I think the way Ben White's played for Scotland, he merits staying on the bench. Ben Healy for me comes in as your 10 option against England. I think there's an option later on in the game potentially to go for Broke and to move Finn Russell out to 12 if we're desperate, and put Healy on, perhaps for the kicking or whatever, which leaves one last bench spot. And with the back three I've selected, that you might think that I would put Maitland in there. If Maitland is, I suppose, in the sense we've got 12 covered with Finn Russell. We've also got other positions covered by different people. However, I think personally I would put Harris on the bench if he's not starting. So he can come on as a winger. He could come on at 13 and Tuilotu can move to the wing or move inside. It gives us, we've still got lots of options, but he's been such a seasoned campaigner for Scotland. If I'm rolling the dice a little bit and putting Tuilotu and Cammy Redpath in the midfield, then I'm keeping Chris Harris in the squad. So that's my squad. Let me know what you think of that. And then just finally, I think I've probably not talked about absolutely everything I wanted to talk about, but just finally, the new RFU tackle directive / law type thing. They've now announced RFU that you must tackle below the waist in amateur rugby, and that's at youth level and at adult level, and everybody has kicked off either defending it or attacking it. And the thing for me that that's kind of daft about it is that folk are sort of citing all kinds of craziness. Now, it was funny because one of my observations of it was two of the worst concussions I've had. Incidentally, one of them being the last one, which might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. So it might not be the worst concussion. It might just be the multitude of concussions that I had that made me eventually just go, I can't do this anymore. Have come from tackles. In fact, the first concussion, not that I remember happening, but the first concussion that I sort of recall the after effects of was from a tackle in under 18s. With a knee to the head. Now, I was about to kick off earlier today when folk were saying it, it protects the head doing this. Until Johnny McGinty on the Scottish Rugby podcast did say we were taught to tackle cheek to cheek. And he is 100% right. We were taught to tackle cheek to cheek. I remember that's how they used to do it. And I thought to myself, so basically what Johnny McGinty's saying is that you weren't unprotected, you're just really bad at rugby, so thanks for that. But equally, I see where they're coming from. I do have some sympathy for certain arguments about this. One, it's a sudden change. And so the game will change in amateur levels. It's not such a change as to completely ruin the game in the amateur levels. As you go down the levels, people aren't as good at offloading. And also, hitting someone low and hard will bring them down and give you an opportunity to steal ball at the ruck. So, in fact, if you look at like Dan Lydiate and stuff like that, they've made a career out of tackling like that. I mean, actually, tackling like that. So, I don't think that the this has ruined the game. Brigade have real merit in their argument. I get that some people are like, well, what about Mullen? What about this? What about that? That's all fair and true because, one of the things I used to like to try and do was rip the ball. Wasn't always successful, but it was quite, it could be quite an effective tactic to latch onto the ball rather than the person almost and try and rip it out. And where does that leave you with the new rule? Like new laws. The new law is you must tackle below the waist in RFU. So there's that element of it that it takes away certain defensive abilities, and that all may be so. I mean, one of the things it could do is take away the slapdown rule, but that'll probably cause mayhem just the same. So there's that element of it. I think after listening to Johnny McGitt, what you said, I don't accept that you're deliberately putting the tacklers in danger. You're discouraging tackles like the sort of the Pierce Francis one we saw, where he's standing completely upright and passively. It causes a head-on-head as a result of that, and you're encouraging people to bend at the waist and make the tackle in the midsection. I think there is an argument that they could have maybe started from, say, below shoulder height, so somewhere around the nipples, the nipple area, like badge and below. It's assuming most clubs have their badge in the same place, just to give a little bit more leeway, because obviously as people get older, bending down is a struggle. But one of the things I saw today, and I did quite like it, in fact I loved it, was Jim Hamilton was kind of saying how he wasn't happy with this change in law. And then Neil Back said that that's how he tackled his whole career, round the waist. And I was like, that's one of the best flankers that's ever played this game, saying that. In fact, in my argument, the best flanker that I recall playing. And yeah, okay, he played for England and we can all be biased about who's who, but Neil Back was awesome in his day. I don't think it's going to ruin the game. I do think it's going to change the game. I think there's going to be more people trying to throw ridiculous offloads, which might lead to more stops and starts. I do think that it potentially, because England's got a little bit of a pyramid system, leaves a bit of an issue between Championship and League One in England, where they're going to be playing different laws. So you could win League One because you've got like a team that loves chucking the ball about, and then go to the Championship with spanked because you can't defend them all. But it's something, and somebody needed to try something. And I think maybe potentially there's ways that they could have done this a bit more softly. I've seen other tweets talking about how they, like professional rugby players, such as Kat Merchant, coming out and saying that her concussions were caused by low tackles and not having the right angles and being forced to do head-on low tackles will ultimately cause more concussions. Equally, arguably, I've not played at the level that she has, or anywhere near that level, for incidentally, or some of the other players like Hamilton and all that have complained about this. But the worst dump tackle I ever received was round my thighs, where the guy came at me head on. I don't have a step in me, so that's I got caught, thighs squeezed, and went about 8 steps backwards before landing, and it hurt like hell. I landed on my back as well. So yes, whilst I fully understand the concerns. I don't think the idea that you can't make a dominant tackle if you're tackling round the waist. The game is ruined. The game's gone soft. This will cause more concussions without there being evidence or massive studies done to say that it will. I understand in France it says the opposite. I know there was a trial that was disbanded because they seem to say it was causing more concussions, but my understanding of that was these were boys that were playing in a cup competition with different laws, and then they were going and playing in their league the week afterwards and tackling upright again. So I think it needs to be given a chance, but I think it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction rather than thinking it through and even consulting. I think if they consulted with clubs and players and such like, and done a big consultation on the matter, I think they would have got an answer that maybe wouldn't have set everybody off. And for once, it's nice to be talking about a union that isn't the SRU with bad PR. So thank you, England. We appreciate that. Anyway, I have rambled for a lengthy period of time about, I'm pretty sure, nothing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're still with me, then great. Next week, I have Hugh McKee coming on the podcast with me. He is a former high school friend who loves combat sports, and is going to talk about MMA and boxing and what he thinks is exciting in it and how he got involved in watching it so much and why he likes it so much. I've never heard anyone that has quite the in-depth opinions on the matter. I mean, most people's, or certainly my level of knowledge in terms of combat sports is, I think so-and-so will knock the living daylights out of so-and-so, and that's about as much as it goes. Watch the occasional UFC match or the occasional boxing match if it's on, but don't go out my way to find it. So, in any event, thank you for listening so much. There will be another podcast next week. If there's any issues you're not happy with on here, please give me feedback. I'm quite happy to hear it. I want to get better at presenting these things. And likewise, if there's any questions you have or any comments on my 23 for the Scotland-England game, then let me know. It's just as well I don't pick it because I can never be blamed for it going well. If that is the 23 that comes out and we get pumped, don't blame me. I don't think Toonie took his advice from me. But have a great week, guys. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.